The biggest mistake of humankind today is assuming that we need more nature in our lives. I need to be closer to nature. I need to spend more time in nature. And that might sound counterintuitive to be a mistake, but the mistake that's being made is every time someone says that or thinks that, they automatically assume I am not nature. We view ourselves as I'm observing the universe. That's not true at all. I am the universe, and I'm observing a piece of me. Like I came from that. We're like a meat suit made of stardust, and we just forget. So I think all of this, going back to loneliness and depression, and what you're talking about right now, all of that starts with separation. I'm separate from you. Now I'm separate from nature. Now I'm separate from the stars. And like, I get this little idea of me around the age of 5, and I'm trying not to sound like Alan Watts here, but all psychopathy, if you study psychopaths, all psychopathy starts with separation. All of it.
Chase, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah.
And also thank you for hosting me. This is an incredible experience. What a beautiful place.
Thank you, man. And thanks for coming out. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. It's an honor.
You got in here last night.
Yeah.
And we stayed up till the crack of 9:15 talking about DMT and just, can the simulation be broken?
Or what is it?
I'm fascinated by this. Yeah. So I went from seeing your video online that was, you have like a 4-minute TLDR video of your whole thing. And I saw someone bootlegged it off of TikTok and somebody else stole that and then reposted it on X. So I'm scrolling through, I saw this thing, and I went from seeing your video for the first time to inviting you over to the house, I think within 24 hours, maybe 48 hours.
About that, yeah. Which I was just blown away by this.
Yeah, and
the reasoning you gave for it was, I thought was very interesting. Do you mind saying what was the main reason for that?
Yeah, well, I see a lot of crap on social media, but somehow I got rated the #1 behavior profiling guy in the world. And I can see fakeness from a mile away. It's my job. It's my whole career. And I watched the people's reactions in that video, and that was the most genuine thing that I could ever see online. And it was just, I watched it again 2 or 3 times, just like, let's see if this is scripted. Let's see if somebody's faking it. And there was nothing. And I thought, this is profound. And I thought, this has to be real because of the behavior that I'm observing in the video. And if that is true, this is going to be one hell of a discovery, whatever it is. And we may experiment with this for the next 3,000 years and not figure it out. But I still think it's important to take the step.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for all of that. And again, it's always a huge kind of check mark when people of a certain caliber and understanding all of a sudden start to resonate and understand that something is there. And to me, what you just described was always a huge data point. I just couldn't articulate it as well as you just did, because I knew that it's significant, but I didn't know exactly why so significant. But there is something there about the dropping of the mask that you see in people that see the code.
Yeah.
That I always thought was very significant when I saw because if people, even when they would be totally on board, they'd be excited. Later, when they see it, you realize that even that excitement was a type of an act. It was like, oh, like they're acting something out.
Yeah.
And then when they see it, they're like, oh, there's like I did not expect that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, we in the context of this conversation, because this is a very impromptu, and we're just doing like a very, we're trying to do a simple thing, and you haven't seen it yet.
Right.
And we want to have a little bit of a conversation, both before and after. And actually, to be honest, I also wanted to do it for slightly of a selfish reason, because I do have a podcast, and I actually wanted to explore a little bit your mind in general, and your set of expertise, but maybe in the context of this and what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
So I'm always, to the extent that I can, of course, I'm trying to bring value for people. And you definitely carry a lot of value in terms of like analysis and understanding what things mean in the context of human behavior and general patterns in the world. What is your most general impression of what the future holds for us? We just had a conversation off camera where we both said that, there's all these possibilities. Clearly everybody understands that something else is happening, something big. It's not really clear why or what it is. It's not clear if it's UAPs or AGI, or we just like, at each other's throat too much. But if you have to give your honest analysis, but if you have to inject some optimism into it, what do you think? What's our survival rate, and how can we potentially get there?
So I think if you look at Google search trends or any search engine, not just Google, over the last like 90 days, maybe 180 days, I don't remember what I looked at, but you can see this unbelievable upward trend in people searching for the Kabbalah, the Bhagavad Gita, the Dhammapada, the more biblical searches than ever in the last like 10 years. Searches for Bible verses and stuff have gone up like 6,000%. And I think there's some kind of, I would be an idiot to try to like, oh, I've got this figured out. Here's what it is. But there's something going on where there is some kind of spiritual, maybe awakening or spiritual craving. Maybe there's a craving, because I think we're in these times where there's unlimited connection to everyone on the planet, and we're in the middle of a loneliness and depression pandemic. People are lonely in New York City and LA. They're lonely. So we're in this period right now where people are searching for meaning and purpose, and we know that like that meaning and purpose is so critical to our lives. So that is, I think, what's going on, because we have things like Apple Vision Pro. And as a quick example, what I've told my kids since they were 5 years old, as a brainwashing guy, and being the guy that studies brainwashing and interrogation and all that stuff, is if you ever see a product that can't tell you the problem that they're solving, you need to be very scared. You need to be scared.
Which is most of it, basically.
Yeah. So like if you look at Amazon.com, they ship stuff faster to you. They get it to your door. You don't have to go to the store. You save some time. You save some money. Here's a coupon. They are very open about the problems that they're solving. Then you go watch a 3-hour Apple, whatever they call the keynote thing, where they talk about this Vision Pro coming out. They don't mention it. Not one.
The Vision Pro, the mission.
The Vision Pro. What problems are they trying to solve? And they don't tell you. Facebook glasses, whatever those are called, the Meta glasses. They don't tell you the problem that they're trying to solve. And they're trying to solve loneliness and a loss of meaning.
Do you think they're aware of that? Or do you think they're just catering to it?
I think they're absolutely aware of it, yeah.
But do you think that their product, from their point of view, is that they're catering to attention? Or do you think they really understand that loneliness is what they're solving?
I think they truly understand that.
Really?
Yes. Which is why they try to humanize that thing so much. Let me make other avatars, let me make other people in there. So I can manufacture a placebo of interaction for a short period of time. And I can make this VR headset better than your shitty life for just 15 or 30 minutes a day. And Apple went at it a pretty smart way, that they're not saying, come join this virtual reality. They're saying, this is your new computer. You're going to put this on, and it's going to change how you work. And so they went at it a different way, but they're not willing to talk about what problems they're solving.
Interesting. So I was wondering, again, you definitely would have a more educated opinion on this. it always feels to me like, and as you were talking, it also came to me that, so like, you know, even without what I'm proposing, it's clear to us from the most physicalist perspective that whatever this is, that's already some kind of a rendering. Even if you believe just there's a physical world, whatever this is not what the real world looks like, right? It's not the atoms and the particles, and this is just some kind of a rendering that your brain is manufacturing to allow you to operate in a three-dimensional space.
Right.
With reward functions, like here's a thing I can grab, and here's the distance, food, I can hunt this, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It seems like if we want to zoom out for a second and take into context what you just said, it's almost like it's not that the technologies are bad or that we're losing ourselves in content, is that it became so convincingly real and robust. We get so convinced that that's the real thing that we lost the connection with what the real world really is. So it's like, if the real world, if this is a rendering of whatever the real world is, there still needs to be a felt experience of what it really is. And it sounds like because we, you know, created these pods of like mini experiences within the experience, so like the cities and then the technologies and all of that, they so bamboozled us that we forgot that there's a connection to the real world. It's almost like we need to reacclimate to the fact that there's still like a real thing happening.
Yeah.
And we always have to be guided by it, connected to it, open to it. And I feel like if we can get back to that and infuse and create technologies that are complementing that versus severing our connection to it, then we have the right idea. Then we can possibly move to a more positive space. Would that be something that you would align with?
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest mistakes, the biggest mistake of humankind today is assuming that we need more nature in our lives. I need to be closer to nature. I need to spend more time in nature. And that might sound counterintuitive to be a mistake, but the mistake that's being made is every time someone says that or thinks that, they automatically assume I am not nature.
I always say this. It's crazy. You're the first person that I hear saying this super explicitly, and it's right on the surface. It's so obvious to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's me. Like, I don't, like, if I look outside, if I look around my house right now, like you and I are in my office, this is a simulation. The stuff out there is less simulated and more closer to what I am. It's cells and tissues and exchange of gases and growth and thriving in sunlight and all of this stuff. That's me. And we also, like, we view ourselves as, I'm observing the universe. That's not true at all. I am the universe and I'm observing a piece of me. Like, I came from that. We're like a meat suit made of stardust, and we just forget. So I think all of this, going back to loneliness and depression and what you're talking about right now, all of that starts with separation. I'm separate from you. Now I'm separate from nature. Now I'm separate from the stars. And like, I get this little idea of me around the age of 5, and I'm trying not to sound like Alan Watts here, but
it's okay.
All psychopathy, if you study psychopaths, all psychopathy starts with separation. All of it. And if I told you really quick, if I can give you a quick example here.
No, please. Yeah.
If I said, dude, I just saw somebody. I saw it on video. A guy got stabbed in the middle of the street, and he fell on the ground, and he's bleeding out on the street. And somebody pulled out their phone and filmed it and just stood on top of him and watched him die. Would you call that psychopathic?
Yes.
All right. And that's also in big cities, that's called the bystander effect or the diffusion of responsibility. So the being around large groups of people that are way larger than our initial tribe makes apathy disappear, or empathy just disappears.
Because you think somebody's going to take care of it. So
somebody's going to take care of it. It's not my problem. But if we're in a small town, and the town that I live in, where you are right now, this is a population of 2,200 people, where reputation matters. You won't see someone cut you off. You're not going to see someone like flip you the bird. Everybody holds the door open for each other. Reputation matters because of tribe. Tribe is here. So the further we get, the more separation. We're starting with separation. I separate myself from people so much that I exhibit psychopathic behaviors just because I live in a city. It starts manufacturing psychopathy. So there's this guy named Dr. Robert Hare who's done the most research on psychopaths ever. He invented the checklist of what makes a psychopath. And that is the checklist, right? So those behaviors start becoming more and more common in everybody that lives in a city, not the psychopaths. They're more common in city-dwelling people because that screws up our sense of tribe. Connectedness goes away, and we start separating and separating and separating more and more because our brain can't handle this giant tribe. It is so horrifying to see that. But when it comes down to that checklist, Dr. Hare said, well, big cities attract psychopaths. The only point I disagree with Dr. Hare is that I think big cities are more likely to manufacture them than attract them. They might also attract them, but they are factories for psychopathy.
But because a lot of the behavior is also mimicked, because we mimic each other's behavior. So if we see that something works and somebody rises to the top of whatever it is, company, any hierarchical structure, then we're like, oh, well, I should mimic this behavior.
Yeah.
And then as you move, that's Tony Robbins talks about it a lot, right? The emotion create motion. So, and vice versa. So if you behave a certain way, it creates a certain kind of internal attitudes that it's almost like they move one another. But so it's interesting. First of all, I'm fully aligned with everything you're saying, but the futurist in me always thinks, okay, great. So this is all this is correct. This is what we understand about human behavior because we grew in tribes. But we are the first creature that reached some kind of a universal type of knowledge in which we actually start influencing the environment faster than it can influence our genome, which is what separates us from the animals, really. And in the context of that, the idea that knowledge should stop at some arbitrary point, like, don't fly too close to the sun, to me is very unattractive. It seems arbitrary. It seems, it's the don't venture outside the village story, right? Which we're all descendants of the people who did. So we should be grateful for the attitude of exploration and trying new things. So in the context of that, and in the context of all the untapped real estate in the universe and the multiverse, how do you reconcile everything you just said with the idea that our destiny might be to actually expand into the galaxy? Is it to balance the scales and understand that in order for people to be healthy individuals, we maybe have to just consciously scale down a bit as far as how many people live in a square kilometer, and then maybe create, buildings that are structured in such a way that there's mini communities in the building, versus just having rows of doors that everybody's just facing the same direction. Nobody really knows anybody. So do you ever think about that? How do you reconcile these? Or you think that at the moment we just have to focus on the scaling down and not worry too much about the big picture?
I wouldn't say scaling down, but I'll say this about technology. Technology is outpacing our brain's ability to adapt to it.
I see.
And our brains are not made for 6 million people in a village. So here's the gold standard. And me leaning back, I'm worrying about getting out of focus and stuff. But the gold standard is, in my realm as a neuroscientist, if I take one of our ancestors from 95,000 years ago and I stick him in New York City, will he be terrified? Will he be confused? Will he start to get sick? Will he eventually not want to be there? And I think those ancestors are still in us. Obviously, we have a fear of falling. We have a fear of heights. The facial expressions are universal. So we inherit all of these memories from our ancestors, and I think they're in us. So if I spend time in a place that would have confused the shit out of my ancestors, I create disease. and what in my terms, I call it biopathy, because we have psychological problems, which is psychopathy, and then we have biopathy.
Interesting.
And if I eat foods that confuse the cells of my ancestors, I create biopathy. I create sickness. So if I eat food that my ancestor couldn't recognize, like some kind of 50-syllable long chemical word from a laboratory, that confuses ancestors. So I have no plan to reconcile anything. I don't know. I don't know the right answer.
Yeah.
But I do know that the more we live and ate and act in ways that would not have confused or nauseated or frightened our ancestors, the closer we are to living a good life. And our ancestors viewed themselves as being connected. And us wanting to venture out into space, that is the moment that humans view themselves as special, we have problems in science. Because every problem you can look back on in science gets to us thinking, yes, they were all wrong, but this generation has it all figured out. There's a surgeon, okay, I think it was an orthopedic surgeon, 100 years ago, says, you know what? He's talking to his buddies and he says, what if we started washing our hands that are covered in blood between patients? And let's mandate that we wash our hands between patients. Lost his license for saying this. So I think that there's so much dogma to this day in science. And the two biggest problems in science are it's materialism and reductionism.
What just happened?
I think that light flickered right there.
Oh, okay.
So reductionism. So if I'm a scientist and I go off of scientific principles to understand how a symphony works, still recording.
Yeah.
So if I'm a scientist and I go off scientific principles, so I need materials and reductionist. So I want to understand Mozart's symphony, or I want to understand canon in D, or a really good piece of Chopin that's played by the Philharmonic. I go into the Philharmonic building, and my step one is I'm going to take every instrument and I'm going to take it apart. I'm going to dissect the strings. I'm going to take apart the wood, figure out what the wood is made of. Then I look over at the conductor stand. I was like, oh, there's paper. There's paper with markings on it. I'm going to cut that paper up. I'm going to put the paper that the music is written on under a microscope. I'm going to analyze the paper that the music is written on. And let's say we spend 500 years analyzing the instruments, the strings, the metal the strings are made of, the drums, all the little pieces of the piano, how the piano works. And let's say I spend another 500 years analyzing this sheet of music and what the paper is made out of. I know nothing. I know nothing. So that's exactly how we're trying to explain consciousness and how reality and consciousness interact with each other. Let me just reduce it down to the instruments that are being played, take those apart, and I'm going to analyze the sheet music by cutting the paper apart and putting it in a microscope. You can't do it.
Yeah, so we're fully aligned, but just to clarify, I was coming into it more from the perspective of what you said in the beginning, which is we're not separate from the universe. So in that context, we are the universe understanding that some analysis can bring about certain kinds of things that without it, you can't.
Yep.
And then finding the middle ground, I think, is the answer, which I think you're absolutely right. What you just described is that science overshot the enterprise of understanding by leaning into one modality that exists and very, very useful. Everything that we're using right now is thanks to it and great. But if you think that everything is that, you confuse the symbolic with the real. You confuse the map with the territory, basically.
That's it.
Because I think that ultimately you're absolutely right. I think that actually red and colors and all of that, it's not the wavelength. No, that's the primary thing. That exists as an experience in the universe, which the only thing that can possibly matter. And the rest of it is just a symbolic representation. You come up also in the same space of consciousness, and you think somehow that that's the primary thing. That's the confusion. I guess I was more asking in terms of, because we have this ability, and we are the universe doing this thing with the understanding, I'm always trying to find that middle ground, both in myself and then make the right noises that will convey that attitude as a central thing. So I always use the example of like, you walk in the house, you smell gas, and people immediately jump. Yeah, they added the scent. I'm like, yeah, that's not the point. Yes, I know they added the scent, not the point. The point is the fact you smell it, right? It's binary. There's gas. This with 100% certainty.
Yeah.
If you want to know the volume of the gas in the house, okay, that's a different story. Now you have to bring instruments, you have to figure it out. How do you measure the distribution of gas of a particular kind in a room? You can do that. But right now, there's gas. Mm-hmm. And you got to fix that first. And I feel like that's kind of like maybe the situation we're in. It's like, first of all, let's fix what seems to be the problem.
Yeah.
And then we can worry about these bigger things. I guess, and in my head, I'm playing both roles all the time. I guess I'm so in love with the idea of us populating the galaxy at the end that I never want us to forget that eventually we want to, because it's not, I think that people kind of feel that is the opposite of enjoying, the earthy things. Like, well, no, now you have more Earths. Now you get to explore more worlds where you get to, interact with more environments. But I see exactly what you're saying. You're keeping it real. You're keeping it here because it's the only thing we can touch at the moment. And I appreciate that. It's a really good reminder. In the service of time, one thing I want to ask you before we, do the other thing and then come back and talk about it later. When you look at your own trajectory with everything that I'll obviously link to everything. There's hours of you talking online about your story, about how you came to be who you are today. In a really brief summary, this awakening thing, how do you personally experience it? I know you were talking about like through psychedelics you experienced some of the stuff, but did it fundamentally change your relationship to yourself, your family, your extended circle, in a way that you feel is almost like, would you say that in the last 3-4 years it was like a huge ramp up of that? Because that's what I keep hearing from people. Or do you feel that it was a natural course of things that just kind of happened to your psychology over time?
That was a huge ramp up.
Okay.
For sure. So the first time I did psychedelics, I woke up the next day and I guess I'd fallen asleep towards the end of it. But I had texted myself.
Was it mushrooms, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I had sent myself a text somehow during the journey. And it was like the biggest trauma that I didn't know that I had, like this huge psychological trauma. And which is me being deployed 9 times. Like 9 deployments is a lot.
It is a lot.
And I wasn't there to raise my kids. And it never really went through my mind because I was patriotic. I'm serving the country. I'm doing good stuff and making the world free and all this shit that that you tell yourself, and especially in the military. But I woke up and I read this thing. It's forgive yourself for being deployed. And I had never, that moment, I thought there's truth in this molecule with a capital T. And I don't need to understand what serotonin receptors it's binding to. I don't need to go in and like draw some cerebrospinal fluid out of my back to understand that there's some profound truth here. And that was the first time in my life that I thought that a molecule just a molecule could have intelligence. It's like when people explained it to me, they were like, well, the mushroom's going to take the wheel and decide what to do. And I hadn't done it before. I'm like, oh, yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, it's going to take this magic journey. And you scoff at it. And it's not spiritual until you get that encounter. And you say, like, that was not me. Like, I did not have the wheel at that moment. Like, they were in charge. They knew what to do. They knew what to tell me. And from that point forward, it's just this massive skyrocketing upward. And then I developed a brain disease, horrible brain disease that hopefully is gone now. I haven't had any symptoms for like almost a year. And this made me have these seizures that were like maybe like a DMT in hell is kind of how I would say that. And but it was still, even though it was horrifying and scary, I got these little glimpses outside, like in a video game. So my son and I, if I can go a little bit longer.
Oh yeah, of course.
My son and I played this video game called Hitman. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, of course.
Where you sneak around, you got to be quiet, and there's a million ways to take your target out. And we played Hitman, and then it started coming up on my YouTube feed, because I would look like how to find the secret silencer and this map of, whatever. So it started coming up on YouTube. And I found these compilations of people that has figured out these ways. Like if in Hitman, you can carry a briefcase and you can hide weapons inside of it, right? So you carry a little sniper rifle or whatever. But in Hitman, if you stick that little briefcase at the edge of a rail and then throw a violin or a muffin on top of that, it lets you come up like 1 more millimeter, and then put a breaching charge, like a door explosive, 3 feet away, and then run up on that briefcase and stand on the violin that's crushed and crumbled on there, and then hit the breaching charge, boom, you can jump over the rail.
Whoa. You opened a new part of the game that wasn't available.
Yeah. So you can walk around.
It's kind of like in Everything Everywhere All at Once. Have you ever seen that film?
I haven't seen it.
Oh my God, you have to watch it. Okay, so I'm going to say nothing about it.
Okay.
I'm so excited for you.
I'll give you a report.
Yeah.
So I saw this. This guy jumps out of the game in Hitman. Some places you can walk around, you can mess with the characters, you can, shoot the bad guy from this illegal place on the map. And then sometimes the developers forgot to put what they call collision with the floor. So like it looks like a floor, but there's no collision, which means boom, you fall through. And for like 9 hours, if you let it go, you can just look up and you're falling and falling and falling. You can see the entire little game map from down below.
Wow.
And just that felt like every seizure I ever had. Like
you're glitching. Map. Yeah, you fell off the map. Wow.
So I got obsessed with, I went and interviewed these game developers from all over the world that made these games. I talked to the guy who built Hitman. And I thought, there has to be, what's the commonality of how to get out of the playable area of a map? And I think that's what we're really doing here. It's I'm going to overload the system in some way. I'm going to do so much in one little tiny spot that a tiny little glitch happens. And another way people get out of the map was if you go into this corner and you crouch and then stand up and crouch 500,000 times.
R.
Yeah, okay. Just do all this random stuff, boom. You blow through this wall and you're on the other side of this thing where you're not supposed to be. And I was obsessed with that, finding all those little commonalities. And I think that is, in my head, I don't think there's some perfect correlation there, but in my head, that's how I see what you're doing.
So that's really interesting, because there's 2 different kinds of getting outside the map in what you described, which I think is also probably the reality of things. One of them sounds more like the briefcase thing, because that sounds just a glitch, like a glitch. Yeah. It's a glitch. That's something about the code that it did not anticipate this exact arrangement, that now it allows this extra thing because it doesn't know how to read, so it just goes, right? The other one, the second one you described, which is crouch, get up, all that, that's planned by whomever built the game.
Really?
It has to be. These cheat codes, they are part of what the simulators or the people who made the game put in the game. And then the question is, how many mistakes do you think a civilization of a certain caliber can make? Now, the interesting thing is that, for example, according to Stephen Wolfram, it's impossible to be an error-free civilization or error-free any kind of code. It's just it's the nature of the game. Errors will always happen. It's part of it, right? Not because we don't know how to, literally it's a law of computation. You cannot have a code running without an error. It's impossible. And that's interesting, because that always leaves this room of that one imperfection that, if you want the deepest thought on that, it's actually the thing that allows everything else to happen. the original map is perfect. And exactly because of that, nothing occurs. Because it's the perfect balance of everything. It's the negation of itself in the perfect ultimate way.
Yeah.
And you know these games with the numbers that you have to rearrange them? You know, from 2 to 9.
Oh, yeah.
Right. You always have to have one number missing. Otherwise you can't move anything.
Yeah.
That's essentially what it is. So the funny thing is that existence itself seems to be already a glitch in perfection.
That's even deeper than I thought.
Yeah. And this is exactly where the question is, is it trying to go back to equilibrium? I always describe it in, I don't know if you ever saw me talk about it, but basically there's a fractal element to this one instance that allowed everything to happen, that expresses itself in everything. And in us, of course, it's the ultimate hole in the donut that goes to all of reality, which is the version that the way it's expressing itself in us, the way we're experiencing it, is choice. That basically, if you look at very closely at what it's like to be you making a choice,
right,
you don't really know. Like, if you look closely, you didn't make the choice. It's just you kind of fall asleep and wake up in reality for a nanosecond. Then now something else, either this is going to happen or this is going to happen. Now you have a story about why you think you made the choice if you're going to be asked about it.
Yeah.
But the thing you feel yourself to be never appropriated that choice. The thing that zigged versus zagged wasn't the thing you call you. It's something and you don't know what it is. The interesting part from when I saw that, if you drill down to it, it's not in the brain either anywhere. It's not even in reality. So the ultimate version of that is, why did reality choose to be versus not to be? It's kind of like this ultimate zig versus zag. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those are that's the question we may not answer in 10,000 years. We may not.
I think we can answer it in this podcast. You can figure it out. Yeah.
Let's get out a sheet of paper. Get a whiteboard. That's how we do it. But that's great. And like the way that I always saw that was, I can look outside the map. I can go outside the playable area. Then I can exit the map, which is falling all the way out of it, right? So like falling down. And then the fourth wall would be, I'm going to exit the game entirely.
Whatever that game is.
Yeah. So like Hitman would jump out of Hitman, and like he would be able to look down and say, oh shoot, I've got Call of Duty right there. I'm going to jump down in there and wreck some shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's how I see the 4 layers of that. Like, number 1, can I see outside? Which I think is what DMT and all that is. So if I can see outside, is there a secondary way that allows me to jump outside of this playable area? Which is what people like Andrew Gallimore are doing with like extended state DMT. Can we retrieve data? Can we map out hyperspace or whatever this place is that people travel to? And I think that's where the pioneering is going to happen in the next 10 years.
Yeah, they're trying to map the space and see how it connects to what greater reality is.
Yeah.
I think he's definitely on the money there. I don't know if you read his first book. So Reality Switch Technologies is great because it educates you on neuroscience and, you know, why DMT is different. But the first book is a lot more kind of like hypothetical, and it goes on a lot of roundabouts about what's potentially out there. And I really like this idea that basically talks about, you know, how world models, they might be the real thing, and we just jump between them. And even the laws of physics, they're just like a local group of like a conviction, a consensus of what's possible in this little bubble. But you can totally go into like a space where completely different possibilities exist. Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. Any case, thank you so much for this first part, and then we'll reconvene, and after you experience it for yourself.
Awesome.
And we'll talk about it. Thank you so much for doing this.